His hand paused on the doorknob, eyes scanning the chandelier I hung myself, as if counting what I was worth. My son smiled for the first time in years, not at me, but at the marble floor under his shoes. That night, I slid an envelope across the table, and the world between us cracked open for good. When my husband died, silence filled every corner of this house, the kind of silence that isn't peaceful. It hums with absence, like a wound that forgot how to close. I was 59 then, 63 now. 4 years of learning how to breathe without someone deciding when I should exhale. My name is Ruth Ellison. I was a wife for 35 years, a mother for 32, and a fool for both just as long. I say that without bitterness. It's simply arithmetic. You spend decades giving, they spend decades taking, and one day you wake up realizing you've built a life for everyone but yourself. Marcus, my son, used to have the same eyes as his father. Warm brown, curious, full of questions. Lately they've turned into mirrors. You look at him, and all you see is yourself reflected in ways you never wanted. When he showed up that afternoon, unannounced, it wasn't love that walked through the door. It was curiosity wrapped in cologne. He stood there in my new living room, eyes tracing the lines of the walls, the gold frames, the polished banister. His mouth curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Wow," he said. "You've done well without Dad." Just like that. An observation, not a compliment. I remember the sting of that moment better than the sound of my husband's eulogy. Marcus didn't see the years between death and this chandelier. He didn't see the days I rented out the guest room to pay bills, the nights I ate toast instead of dinner to keep the lights on. He only saw the marble now, the house rebuilt from my grief, and thought it fell from heaven. Ashley followed behind him, my daughter-in-law, the kind of woman who never says anything outright. She just leaves her words on the floor like traps. Her perfume arrived before she did, heavy and sweet, the kind that lingers long after she's gone. She kissed my cheek as if it were a formality. "Ruth," she said softly, "this place looks incredible. You've done so much." Her tone was smooth as butter, but her eyes were busy taking inventory. I smiled the way old women do when they know exactly what's happening, but won't give the pleasure of acknowledgement. "I managed?" I said. Ashley laughed lightly. "Oh, you've managed beautifully." Marcus wandered toward the staircase, pretending interest in family photos. I noticed how he skipped the one of me holding him as a child, the one where his father's arm rested around us both like a claim. Maybe it reminded him of the man he's slowly becoming, a man who measures love in ownership. There was a time when Marcus would call me every Sunday. We'd talk about work, his dreams, even his fears. Then Ashley entered his orbit, and suddenly I was orbiting him. Calls became texts, texts became silence. I wasn't naive. I knew what she was doing. I'd done the same once, won a man's devotion by cutting him from his roots. Only difference was, I spent my life regretting it. Now it was happening to me. Full circle. We sat for tea. Ashley commented on my china set. "Vintage, how lovely." Marcus asked about my finances casually, pretending concern. Every word landed like a probe. He mentioned investments, property values, how lonely living alone must be. Lonely. That word. As if it were a weakness instead of a peace I'd earned. I stirred my tea slowly. "I'm fine, Marcus. The house is paid for. Everything's in my name." He nodded, but I saw the flicker in Ashley's eyes, a plan forming behind her polite smile. After they left that evening, I stood at the window, watching their car fade down the road. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from clarity. For the first time, I saw them not as family, but as trespassers. Two people who mistook my silence for surrender. I walked to my study. The desk lamp cast a warm circle of light, the same one my husband used when sorting bills and secrets. I pulled open the drawer and took out a blank envelope. On the front, I wrote, For my son. I didn't know what I'd put inside yet, only that one day soon it would carry the truth he refused to hear from my mouth. I sat back, looking at the words, feeling the years settle around me like dust. For decades, I'd been told to stay graceful, patient, forgiving. That's how women survive betrayal, by swallowing it until it stops tasting bitter. But I'd learned something since the funeral. Bitterness doesn't fade, it ferments. Marcus thought I built this house to impress the world. He didn't know it was my fortress, my evidence that I could rise without the men who left me behind. When I finally went to bed, I stared at the ceiling and whispered into the dark, "You've done well without Dad," repeating his words, reshaping them into armor. Yes, I have, I thought. And soon, Marcus, you'll see just how well. The next morning, sunlight poured through the window like judgment. The house gleamed. It looked alive, but it wasn't built for show. It was built for reckoning. Because this story doesn't begin with grief. It begins with the moment a woman stops asking to be loved and starts demanding to be seen. And that envelope on my desk, it was the start of everything that would follow. After Marcus left that day, the silence returned. Only this time it felt different. Not the hollow quiet of grief, but the steady hum of something gathering. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the chair where he'd sat just hours ago, his fingers drumming on the wood like he couldn't wait to leave. It's strange how memory sharpens when trust fades. I could hear echoes of his voice as a boy, soft, curious, always asking, "Mum, how do you fix things?" And I'd smile and tell him, "With patience." That was before patience turned into my cage. When my husband died, Marcus was 28, already married to Ashley. He called me from the hospital with his voice trembling. "Don't worry, Mum. I'll take care of you." But promises, I've learned, are only as good as the people who make them. By the funeral, Ashley had already taken over the arrangements, talking over me, speaking for me. "Ruth is tired," she'd tell the guests with a sympathetic smile. "She shouldn't worry about these things." I remember watching her glide around in black silk, hand on my son's arm, accepting condolences meant for me. She looked the part of a dutiful daughter-in-law, and yet every glance she gave me was a quiet reminder, "You're no longer the woman in charge here." For years after, I barely saw Marcus. His visits became seasonal. Christmas, sometimes Easter. Always brief, always orchestrated by her. When he did come, his eyes wandered more than they listened. If I spoke about my aches or the loneliness, he'd nod absently, like someone enduring a commercial before his real program began. I tried not to take it personally. God knows I'd made mistakes too. His father, Harold, was a man who believed silence was love and control was devotion. I stayed because that's what women of my generation did. We endured. When he died, I should have felt free. Instead, I felt irrelevant, a ghost haunting my own life. Bills piled up faster than condolences. Harold left more debts than memories. I sold jewelry, my wedding china, even his old office chair. I started renting the guest room to travellers. Lonely men who'd nod politely, but never ask my name. Every dollar I earned went to patching what he'd left behind. That's what Marcus didn't see when he walked through the door and praised my success. He didn't see the nights I stayed up doing calculations with a flashlight because the power had been cut off. He didn't see me standing in the rain, arguing with contractors who treated me like a senile woman with too much hope. He saw marble floors and chandeliers. He didn't see the bruises on my hands from scrubbing them clean. What hurt most wasn't his greed. It was his absence when I needed him most. I remember the winter after Harold died. The pipes froze and burst. I called Marcus, crying, and Ashley answered. She said they were busy, maybe next week. I never called again. I learned how to fix the pipes myself that night, with a wrench, boiling water, and sheer fury. I stood in that cold kitchen, water dripping down my arms, and I whispered, "I can do this. Alone." That was the night I stopped waiting for rescue. But motherhood doesn't switch off just because the child grows cruel. You keep loving them, even when it makes you smaller. I used to pray. For him. Not for his success, but for his softness. I wanted him to find a way back to himself before Ashley hardened him beyond recognition. Ashley, she reminded me too much of myself at her age. Clever, ambitious, pretty in that practiced way. I saw it early. The charm, the patience, the gentle way she rebranded manipulation as care. When Marcus brought her home for the first time, I felt a tremor in my chest. Not dislike, but recognition. She never raised her voice, never argued outright. She simply rearranged the truth until everyone agreed with her version of it. I used to do that too, with Harold. It's how I survived. But Ashley didn't use it to survive. She used it to conquer. Sometimes I wonder if Marcus even noticed when his own thoughts started sounding like hers. I remember one afternoon, maybe a year after Harold's death, Ashley invited me to dinner. The food was perfect. Too perfect. Between the wine and her stories, I realized she wasn't interested in my company. She was interested in my assets. She asked small, pointed questions about the house, the deed, my pension. When I deflected, she smiled, touching my hand like we were allies. "Just looking out for you," she said. That's when the fear began. Not of her, but of what she might make of him. Looking back, I see it clearly now. Betrayal doesn't arrive as a storm. It seeps in like damp under the walls, quiet, persistent, almost invisible until it's too late. When Marcus came back that day, standing under my chandelier, the wound reopened. Not because he'd returned, but because I realized how long ago I'd lost him. I went to my room that evening and took out the old photo album. My fingers brushed over the pages. His first birthday, his graduation, his wedding. The moments when I thought love was unbreakable. But I could see the pattern now. My husband controlled me through silence. My son was being controlled through praise. Different tools, same outcome. Both women, me then, Ashley now, using affection as a leash. That realization didn't break me. It steadied me. I understood that if I wanted justice, it couldn't come from shouting or begging. It had to come from patience, the same weapon that had once imprisoned me. Only this time I'd wield it differently. I closed the album, slid it back into the drawer, and looked at the envelope I'd written for Marcus. It was still blank inside, but I knew what it would become. Not revenge, not rage. Truth. The kind that doesn't scream, but echoes. I whispered to the empty room. "You took after your father, Marcus, but I'm not the same woman I was then." And for the first time in years, I smiled. Not kindly, but with purpose. A week later, they came again. No phone call, no notice. Just the sound of tires crunching on gravel and voices too bright for sincerity. I was pruning the roses when I saw them walking up the path. Ashley's arm looped through Marcus's, her sunglasses large enough to hide intent. "Mom!" Marcus called, waving like a man performing warmth for an audience. We were in the area and thought we'd drop by. I wiped my hands on my apron. "In the area?" I asked. "You live 40 minutes away." Ashley laughed, that polite, tinkling sound that always made me think of glass ready to crack. "Oh, Ruth," she said. "You're so sharp. We missed you." And Marcus wanted to see how the renovations turned out. I looked at her perfectly manicured nails and thought, no, you wanted to see how much you could take. They stepped inside like they owned the place. Marcus moved from room to room, opening doors, commenting on things that weren't his business. "You really modernized it," he said, tracing a hand along the oak railing. "This place must have cost a fortune." "It cost time," I replied. "And patience. Things money can't buy." Ashley's smile didn't falter, but her eyes flickered. She'd wanted me to brag, to open the door she was already halfway through. Instead, I closed it quietly. We sat in the living room. Ashley crossed her legs, elegant and deliberate, and began her performance. Ruth, we've been thinking, she started, her tone syrupy. This house, it's beautiful, but so large. It must be overwhelming for you to manage alone. We could help, you know. Maybe sell it? Find you a smaller place near us? I sipped my tea. Steady hands, even breath. Near you, I repeated, letting the words hang. That's generous. Marcus leaned forward. Mom, it's not about control, we just worry. What if something happens to you here alone? It's not practical. Practical. There's a word men use when they mean profitable. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. He wore his father's expression. Polite concern, masking quiet entitlement. The last time I'd seen that face, Harold was asking me to sign a loan document that drained my savings. I'd signed then. I wouldn't now. You know, I said, setting down my cup. I've managed just fine. But I appreciate the offer. Ashley tilted her head, feigning sympathy. We only want what's best for you. Oh, I know, I said softly. You've always been such a caring daughter-in-law. For the first time, her smile twitched. Marcus sighed, the sound of a man who thought he was being patient with a difficult child. Mum, don't make this harder than it has to be. I almost laughed. Harder than it has to be. The phrase every manipulator hides behind. Tell me, Marcus, I said, leaning back. Whose idea was this? Yours or hers? He blinked, caught off guard. What? Ours, of course. Ashley stepped in smoothly. We make decisions together. Ah, I said. Then I suppose you'll share the profit too. The silence that followed was delicious. Ashley recovered first. Ruth, that's unfair. We'd never take advantage of you. Good, I said, standing. Because I'd hate to embarrass you by proving otherwise. I turned toward the kitchen, pretending to tidy dishes, giving them space to squirm. Behind me, Marcus's voice hardened. Mum, we're trying to help, but you're being defensive. Dad would have agreed with us. There it was. The ghost he always summoned when logic failed him. Your father, I said, turning slowly, believed women should be quiet. Is that the kind of agreement you want? He flushed. Ashley's hand found his arm, calming him with a practiced touch. Ruth, please, she said gently. Let's not argue. Maybe we can look at the paperwork together. I already spoke to a friend in real estate. You did what? Her voice faltered, the first crack in her composure. I stepped closer. You spoke to someone about my property before I agreed to sell it? Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. It was just a conversation, she stammered. You thought I'd die soon, didn't you? I said quietly. And you'd need to be prepared. The color drained from Marcus's face. Mom? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Years of being dismissed had taught me the power of stillness. You came here today to test me, I said, to see if I'm weak enough to sign whatever you slide across the table. I may be old, but I'm not finished. Ashley stood abruptly, smoothing her skirt. We should go. Marcus hesitated, caught between shame and pride. He mumbled something about misunderstanding, but I'd already turned away. At the door, Ashley tried one last performance. We'll talk again when you're calmer, she said softly. I smiled. Oh, I'm calm, I told her. You should worry when I'm quiet. The moment the door shut, I felt something inside me shift, something hard and certain settling into place. They thought they'd seen weakness. What they'd really seen was patience sharpening into resolve. I sat down again at the kitchen table, the same place where I'd once taught Marcus to count coins, the same table where his father once told me I'd never manage without him. I reached for the envelope on the counter, the one marked for my son. Still blank, still waiting. I held it between my hands like a promise. It wasn't time yet, but it would be soon. The phone rang 2 mornings later while I was sorting old receipts. A polite voice on the other end introduced herself as Nancy from the law office. She said she was just confirming my signature on the property transfer forms. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I felt something cold ripple up my spine. I'm sorry, I said slowly. What property transfer? She hesitated, papers shuffling. The documents authorizing the sale of your house, Mrs. Ellison. Signed last week, witnessed by your son. I stared at the phone like it was speaking another language. There must be a mistake, I whispered. I didn't sign anything. Her voice softened, embarrassed. Oh, then I think you'd better come in. When I hung up, the silence wasn't just heavy. It was suffocating, the kind that presses down until breathing feels optional. I sat there, the clock ticking too loudly, the kettle hissing behind me. They'd done it, Ashley and Marcus. My son had stood by while she forged my name. By the time I reached the lawyer's office, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the pen to sign my statement. Nancy laid the papers in front of me. Neat, official, monstrous. There it was. My name, written with confident loops. Not my handwriting, but close enough that any stranger would swear it was. Who submitted this? I asked. Your daughter-in-law brought it in, she said gently. She said you were ill and didn't want to make the trip yourself. For a long time, I just stared at that line. Ill. They'd painted me as senile, fragile, an old woman ready to be managed. Marcus had signed as witness. The betrayal wasn't just greed now. It was annihilation. They wanted not just my house, but my identity erased. I walked home in a daze. Every streetlight seemed to flicker harder than usual. The house felt different too, as if it knew it was being stolen. That night, I sat at my desk with a glass of whiskey and my late husband's old ledger. He used to hide everything in plain sight: debts, insurance policies, quiet arrangements. I started leafing through, desperate for something, anything to fight back with. And then I found it. An old file marked Life Coverage, Secondary Beneficiary. I opened it, and there it was. Harold's life insurance. He'd changed it a few years before he died, transferring full control to me. Marcus had no idea it even existed. It was a small policy, nothing extravagant, but enough to make a difference. Enough to rebuild, again. A laugh escaped me, sharp and broken. The irony was almost poetic. The same man who had tried to control me had accidentally left me my weapon. But the money wasn't the real revelation. As I read deeper, I realized Harold had been transferring small sums to an unknown account, monthly, for nearly a decade before his death. When I tracked the account number, I found the name attached: Ashley's mother. The page trembled in my hands. So that was it. The rot didn't start with my son. It started long before. Ashley's family had been in our lives for years, quietly draining Harold's guilt and money while pretending innocence. She didn't just stumble into Marcus's path. She'd been trained to find him. It wasn't love. It was inheritance planning. I sat there until dawn, the pieces snapping together one by one. Ashley's kindness after the funeral, her quickness to handle paperwork, her sudden push for me to downsize. Every word she'd ever spoken to me was strategy. By morning, the shock had burned off, leaving something cleaner behind. Not rage, not grief, focus. I made a list. Call lawyer. Secure bank accounts. Change passwords. Record everything. Stay quiet. I wasn't going to confront them. Not yet. You don't fight snakes by stomping around. You wait until they slither into the open. When Marcus called that afternoon, I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Mom?" he said, voice stiff. "You sound upset. Everything okay?" "I'm fine," I said evenly. "Just tired." Ashley's voice chimed faintly in the background, asking something I couldn't catch. Marcus lowered his tone. "Listen, about the house. Ash might have gotten ahead of herself. We were only trying to plan for the future." "The future?" I repeated. "Yours or mine?" He sighed, a long exhale meant to sound patient. "We just thought it'd be easier if—" "Marcus," I interrupted quietly. "Did you know she forged my signature?" Silence. Then, "Mom, that's ridiculous." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. Yes, ridiculous, I said. That's what I thought too. When the call ended, I sat for a while, watching the sun crawl across the carpet. The old Ruth would have cried. But tears were a currency I'd spent too freely already. Instead, I reached for a new notebook. The first page I titled Operation Truth, because what they'd taken from me wasn't just a house, it was the right to be believed. If they thought they'd fooled a grieving widow, they'd soon learn how dangerous grief can be when it stops begging for kindness. I opened the drawer and pulled out the envelope marked for my son. This time I began to fill it. Copies of the forged documents, the policy statement, a photo of Harold's transfers to Ashley's mother. Each item slipped inside like a stone in a river, building weight, shaping current. By the time I sealed it, I felt lighter, not because justice had come, but because I finally understood the scale of the game I was playing. This wasn't a story of a naive old woman. It was a story of legacy, and what happens when the next generation mistakes inheritance for entitlement. I looked at the envelope one last time and whispered, "You took after your father, Marcus, but your wife took after me. Only one of us, I thought, will survive that resemblance." The next morning I woke before dawn. The house was still, faint blue light spilling across the hallway. For the first time in months, my mind felt clear, like fog lifting off a lake. I brewed coffee, black and bitter, and sat at the kitchen table with my notebook. On the cover, I'd written Operation Truth. I didn't plan this out of anger. Anger burns too fast. What I needed was precision, quiet, invisible steps that would leave no room for denial when the time came. The first thing I did was call Lawrence Harper, the lawyer who'd helped me with Harold's estate years ago. A good man, old enough to remember my husband's temper, sharp enough to hear what I didn't say outright. When I told him about the forgery, there was a pause on the line, then a low, controlled voice. "Don't confront them yet, Ruth. Gather, verify, let them believe you're blind." I smiled. "Oh, they already do." We met later that afternoon in his office. He helped me secure every account, lock my property documents behind a legal hold, and set up a living trust in my name only, one Ashley could never touch. Then, at my request, he drafted something new. A will. But not just any will. A decoy. The first version, neat and official, would go straight into their hands when the time came. It left the house to Marcus. The second version, handwritten and legally validated, would stay sealed with Lawrence. It left everything to a local women's shelter, the same one that had helped me after Harold's death, when I didn't know where to start. It was the closest thing to poetry I'd written in years. I stopped by the bank next. The manager, a young man named Evan, recognized me from years ago when I used to deposit Harold's paychecks. I leaned across the counter and said, "Evan, I need something discreet. Recorded copies of all recent inquiries made about my account. Names, times, everything." He nodded. Curious but professional. When he slid the report across the counter 20 minutes later, I saw Ashley's name printed neatly in the authorized request column. Of course. That night, I opened the file and added it to the envelope. The stack inside was growing heavier. Still, I knew I couldn't do this alone. So I called Mara, an old friend I hadn't seen in years. We'd worked together at the library before I retired, back when I was still learning how to live without apology. She'd gone on to freelance journalism, sharp mind, sharper ethics. She arrived that evening, hair tied back, eyes alert. We sat on the porch, the night thick around us. "Mara," I said, "I need help documenting something without it looking documented." She didn't blink. "Who are we catching?" "My son," I said softly, "and his wife." She let out a slow whistle. "That's ugly." "Ugly's an understatement." I showed her the envelope, the copies, the handwriting analysis from the lawyer. She listened quietly, the kind of silence that holds weight. Then she said, "You've got enough to hurt them. But if you want to end them, You'll need one thing more: proof of intent. You need to make them speak. The next week became a study in patience. Mara helped me set up a small recording device, hidden inside the frame of the mirror by the entryway. Every conversation, every word would be captured. I even planted a decoy document, an unsigned property, draft, on the desk in my study, just visible enough to tempt curiosity. All I had to do was wait. Meanwhile, I played my part. I called Marcus once, asked if he'd visit. I made my voice softer, a little slower, like I was fading. I told him I'd been feeling confused lately. I could almost hear Ashley smile through the phone. When they arrived the next Saturday, I wore the same apron I'd always worn. Ordinary, harmless, invisible. Ashley greeted me with exaggerated sweetness, her eyes already drifting toward the study. We had lunch. She talked about investments again, about how Marcus had been researching good agents in case I ever decided to sell. Marcus nodded along, distracted by his phone, playing the role of dutiful son badly. After dessert, I accidentally mentioned the decoy will sitting on my desk. Your father's things got me thinking, I said lightly. I've been updating some paperwork, but I'm not sure I understand all the terms. You two might be able to help. I saw the spark in Ashley's eyes, a flicker of hunger she couldn't mask fast enough. They followed me into the study. I pointed to the papers, feigning confusion. Here, I said. Is this how I list beneficiaries? Ashley stepped forward, scanning the page, her voice smooth. Yes, that's right. You can sign here and we'll take care of the rest. I nodded. Of course. You always take care of things, don't you? I signed nothing. I smiled, thanked them, poured tea. The recorder caught every word. After they left, I sat in that room for a long time, letting the quiet settle. My pulse was steady. I felt not anger, but something more dangerous. Satisfaction. By nightfall, I'd transferred the recording to a flash drive and placed it into the envelope. The sound of Ashley's calm deceit was almost tender, like she thought she was untouchable. I sealed the flap and wrote one more thing on the front, beneath for my son. To be opened when love no longer means obedience. Then I called Mara. It's done, I said. She laughed softly. You've got them, Ruth. Not yet, I said. First, I'll let them believe they've won. Because victory, I'd learned, is sweetest in silence, and deadliest when it arrives dressed as surrender. By the time the day arrived, everything was in place. The house gleamed like it was preparing for company, which, in a way, it was. Not for guests, but for judgment. I cooked Marcus's favorite meal, roast chicken with thyme, mashed potatoes, and the gravy recipe he used to beg for when he was 8. I set the table with the good china, the kind Harold used to forbid me from using just for ourselves. Tonight wasn't just anything. Tonight was closure dressed in porcelain. They arrived early, wearing smiles that didn't touch their eyes. Marcus carried a bottle of wine. Expensive, unnecessary. Ashley wore white again, like innocence could be sewn into fabric. Mom, Marcus said, kissing my cheek. This looks incredible. It's good to feed family, I said simply. Dinner was polite. Too polite. The kind of calm that precedes earthquakes. I played my role. Gentle, uncertain, a little forgetful. Ashley did most of the talking. She asked about the new documents, said she'd love to help finalize them. Marcus nodded along like an echo. When plates were cleared, I stood and said, I have something for you. Ashley's eyes flicked to Marcus. He looked cautious, curious. I went to the study and returned with the envelope, the same one I'd been feeding for weeks. I laid it on the table gently, as though it were delicate. For my son, I said. I've been meaning to give this to you. He frowned, a nervous smile tugging at his lips. What's this? A mother's gift, I said softly. Everything I've left for you. Ashley leaned forward, her fingers grazing the flap. Marcus looked at her, uncertain, but she gave a small nod. He opened it. At first, silence. Then the sound of paper rustling, slower, heavier, the forged signatures, the bank records, the transcript of the recorded conversation, the letter from my lawyer outlining the pending charges if the forgery proceeded. His eyes darted to mine, wide and frantic. "Mum, what is this?" "It's proof," I said quietly. "Proof of what you allowed, what she planned, what I endured." Ashley reached for the papers, but I was faster. I placed a second document on the table. My decoy will, bold and official. "This," I said, "is what you thought you wanted." Marcus's face paled. Then I placed the real will beside it, sealed in blue ribbon. "And this," I continued, "is what you actually earned?" Ashley's voice broke first. "You can't be serious." "I'm very serious," I said, steady. "This house will belong to a women's foundation when I'm gone. Everything else, gone, donated, erased. I'll leave the world lighter than you left me." Marcus slammed his fist against the table. "You're doing this out of spite." "No," I said, my voice even. "I'm doing this out of memory." He looked bewildered. "Memory?" I nodded. "Of every time I begged you to visit. Of every bill I paid alone. Of every lie she told that you believed, because it was easier than facing your own guilt." He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "Don't," I said. "Not tonight." Ashley stood, trembling now, her facade cracking. "We can fix this," she said. "We'll undo the paperwork. Just tell us what you want." "What I want," I said, "is honesty. You used my grief to build your comfort. You pretended concern so you could count my walls, my windows, my worth. You've mistaken love for access. But love is not an open door. It's a boundary." Marcus pushed back his chair, standing. His face was red, his voice shaking. "You don't understand, Mom. You've been impossible to talk to. Ashley was trying to help. Help herself," I corrected. "And you let her." He tried to meet my eyes, but couldn't. He looked at Ashley instead, searching for direction. And that was all I needed to see. The man I raised was gone. What stood before me was her creation. I slid another paper across the table. A letter. Short, typed, legal. "That's from my lawyer. It explains the next steps. I haven't pressed charges yet, not officially. That's your last mercy." Ashley's lip trembled. "You wouldn't ruin your own son." I met her gaze, calm as stone. "I already did that once, when I raised him to believe a woman's silence is love." The words landed like a verdict. Marcus sank back into his chair. His hands covered his face, his voice breaking. "Mum, please." I wanted to reach out, to comfort him. The ache in my chest nearly betrayed me. But mercy, I realized, isn't always kindness. It's clarity. "You'll get through this," I said softly. The way I did. Alone. Ashley stood abruptly, grabbing her purse, her voice high and cold. "Come on, Marcus. We're leaving." But Marcus didn't move. He just sat there, staring at the evidence of his own undoing. When they finally left, I watched their car pull away, tail lights fading into the dark. The air was still, sharp with the scent of time and endings. I walked back to the table and gathered the remains of the evening, the wine glasses, the papers, the crumbs of a meal no one had truly tasted. Then I picked up the envelope. It was empty now, its purpose fulfilled. I held it for a long moment before tearing it in half. The sound was small, but final. In that moment, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. The kind of clean that comes after a storm, when the air still smells like lightning. Justice hadn't come with fireworks. It came with quiet, with proof, with the simple act of saying enough. And as I turned off the lights, I caught my reflection in the dark window, older, steadier, untouched by pity. For the first time in years, I looked like someone who owed nothing to anyone. The morning after they left, the house felt hollow, but lighter, like something poisonous had finally bled out. I made tea and watched sunlight crawl across the floor. The quiet wasn't cruel anymore. It was earned. By week's end, word had spread. Ashley's name slipped through the town like smoke. Talk of forged papers, betrayal, disgrace. Marcus's job called him in, whispers following him everywhere. I didn't gloat. I just let silence do what justice never could. He came to me days later, shoulders bent, eyes red. "Mum," he said. I didn't stop her. I thought I could fix it. I looked at him for a long time. "You wanted it easy," I said, "and easy destroys people." He flinched, tears trembling. "Do you hate me?" "No," I answered softly. "I just don't trust you, and that's worse for both of us." When he left, I didn't cry. Grief had become an old visitor by then, familiar, harmless. Months passed. I visited the women's shelter I'd named in my will, the one that would inherit the house. Standing in those narrow rooms, I saw women folding their pain into plans, the way I once did. "This place will be yours?" I told the director. "It's time it belonged to someone who knows the cost of keeping it." Now the house stands quiet again. The air smells of roses and forgiveness I don't owe anyone. Marcus writes sometimes. Short letters, humbled words. I read them, then tuck them away. Some silences are sacred. I've stopped confusing peace with forgetting. Justice didn't arrive like thunder. It came like morning light, slow and certain. And when I think of everything I lost and everything I reclaimed, the truth settles inside me. Love doesn't end when they betray you, but self-respect begins when you stop forgiving cruelty.